Hello.
Hi, how are you?
All right, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. That's good. So we have Morgan and Zavia and Vidhi. Welcome. So this was the week that we submitted Google Summer Code applications, and I've been looking them over, and it looks, pretty manageable from our end. So what happens is people submit applications, and then on the mentor side, we have to select those that we find to be people who we want to select for the program. So I think we had 2 people for the Greenfield, what we call the open source sustainability Greenfield project, about 10 for the large language models project, and then about 10 for the DevoWorm graph neural networks project. So I think that's a pretty good distribution of people. And so now we're going to make selections on that. And then we'll see how many slots we get from Google. They give us, actually our org gives us slots, so we'll see how many we get. In the years past, we've gotten ranging from, like, we've had to make some tough decisions to very generous allotments, so we'll see where we are with this. And, then I think around May 1st, we'll announce who's gotten support from Google. And we also, at that time, will start our weekly open source meeting. So if you've not been in the org before, we do this from May of every year to about September or October. Sometimes it ends kind of in late August. It usually follows along with the Google Summer of Code program, but sometimes we go a little bit farther into the year. And the idea is that we want to encourage people not just to do their work in Summer of Code, but we want to encourage people to think about open source during that time of the year. And so that offers people who haven't been selected for the program or haven't, sometimes we only get to have 1 slot per project, to continue the work that they were doing in the application period or participate in our open source group. So in terms of what we do there, we have people present on their projects. We talk about different topics in open source. And we also talk about things having to do with professional development. So Jesse, of course, it works alongside me to sort of produce a lot of those content features in the meeting. So, he'll have usually his own information about professional development. It's usually very good. He has a lot of things he draws from practical experience on. We also have things on open source, different current trends in open source, etc., etc. So this is always an opportunity for people to participate in this sort of professional development, this sort of project development, and thinking about open source in ways they normally wouldn't. So that's what we have going on over the course of the summer. So good luck to everyone who applied to the projects. And, if you get selected, great. If you don't, reach out and we can continue developing your projects. Okay, so I want to talk about the DevoWorm meetings for the last 2 weeks. So last week we didn't meet, but this week I want to talk about 2 of the meetings. Okay, so the first meeting is from March 23rd. This was the week before last Monday. So this was our meeting. We had more people present on their projects for DevoWorm and the Graph Neural Networks project in particular, which we're calling DevoGraph. This was Barshan presenting on his blog post of his approach called SGEL, and this is on brain networks and their development and evolution, thinking about that in terms of graph neural networks, thinking about this in terms of what he calls GHNs, and then this is a blog post that he produced on this. Then cell tracking, and this cell nest, which is about cell-to-cell communication. And this is in place of what we call graph attention. So this is kind of replacing graph attention. And then just kind of thinking about these papers. So he's actually reviewing these 5 papers that he encountered during writing his proposal. So he reviewed 5 of those papers for those different 5 key papers for those different approaches, and sort of talked about how they're connected, how they're related to one another. So I like this kind of meta-analysis of the AI literature because it's very much in need of that sort of activity. It's very much in need of that sort of synthesis. I think far too often in a lot of the AI work that goes on now, people just put out a bunch of proof of concept papers and then leave it at that, and then move on to something else, where they move on to benchmarking that particular method. And there's nothing that is really scholarly about that. I mean, it's like there's scholarly work in doing the research, but like there's no, we don't understand a lot about its potential. We don't understand how it fits into other things. And so this is nice work to get, try to think about these methods and how they fit together and how we can actually do things with them, which is good. So that was Barshan. And then I guess we had some discussions. I can't remember what Morgan was talking about. I think it was about his work on the agentic coding and a lot of the things he's been doing there. All right. And then we had Utkarsh, who presented on his biological modeling work. So this is what he was doing with the C. elegans embryo, modeling that as a network. He has this interface where he's looking at different measures. So he has this network, which is on the right. He has this 3-dimensional model, which is on the left. And then he has this pipeline. So he's using this Cindy package, which is where they're modeling neurons. It's sort of from a neurophysiological standpoint, working this into a model called neural developmental programs, and then building that into an agent-based model and doing some inference of the network topology, and then putting that all together into an evolving connectome or a developing connectome. Then we had Ashu, who's here, and she was doing her work on mathematically modeling development in hypergraphs and things like that. So these are her notes. She was just showing off her notes. She's doing this dynamic hypergraph construction, doing some k-nearest neighbors, then doing some vertex convolution, functional hyperedges, and kind of working through these different tools for graph neural networks. And then, of course, this idea of anastomosis, which is a term that I introduced in a paper several years ago, where I was talking sort of about the basis for what I call developmental hypergraphs. And anastomoses are these things in biology that bridge to other systems. And so a lot of times you'll find these in anatomy. So you'll, for example, find them in the heart with some of the valves. They join 2 chambers. Sometimes you'll find that in biological systems where 2 subsystems are joined by some sort of smaller pathway. So all those things are kind of classified as anastomoses. And this is kind of caught on in this hypergraphs work to describe network modules that are joined by maybe a cluster or a single connection between the 2. And so this is where that's an interesting feature of the network because a lot of the organizational aspects of the network happen in those regions. Okay, so then she talks about loss functions and other things. So that was a nice presentation from Hough. And then there was some discussion about that. And then I think that was the entirety of that meeting. So it was very primarily focused on Google Summer of Code work. All right, so this is the March 30th meeting. This is from last Monday. This is same crowd, basically. I think we're still talking about Google Summer of Code projects and some other topics. So we've been focused on that in the last couple weeks. Actually, in this meeting, we were having a discussion about the role of agentic coding in GSOC projects and in larger projects in general. And we came to the conclusion, I think, amongst the different mentors here, that we need to have guidelines for this for people. There's been a lot of discussion amongst the mentors across GSOC about how people have shown up this year doing what is not really a very good method for agentic coding. People doing different things with AI agents and producing a lot of work, sometimes making things worse in the projects, and they just want to have clarity as to how that should proceed so people don't waste their time, people don't disrupt the projects, etc. So we had a discussion about this in DevoWorm, and I think a lot of this has to do with really kind of understanding how people work and how it can benefit people. And I don't know if we really have a good handle on that. I know Morgan's working on that, but this is something that is probably going to be an evolving set of standards, and we're not going to come up with the right answer right away. We're going to have to think about this for a while. So it's a huge challenge for a lot of the projects. So then I talked about this article, and actually it's two articles that we'll talk about in sequence in this meeting. The first, it's basically about how when you do this biological modeling work that OpenWorm does, and what OpenWorm has done is take the C. elegans connectome, or the map of connections between the neurons in the C. elegans nervous system, and basically simulate those within a body. So OpenWorm is about simulating the worm, the nematode C. elegans, but it's really about simulating the cells, simulating movement, and then simulating a connectome, which has a behavioral output. So the connectome are the cells with connections between them. Those connections, we simulate kind of when they get turned on and off, or their gradient of activity. And then it produces outputs, it produces behaviors. There are behavioral circuits in that connectome that drive the worm forward, for example, or backwards, or things like that. And so that's kind of what the real significance of OpenWorm is. And this has, of course, been hyped in media articles to say that, like, we're uploading a consciousness, or we have this behavioral program, or something like that. And that's not really the case. We're just simulating biology. And so people have also done very similar things with Drosophila, which is the fruit fly model. And we talked about this in prior Saturday meetings, how people have simulated that connectome, and actually it's a part of the entire connectome of the fly, and basically driven behavioral states as well. So we have these two systems where we can do similar things. We can do things in the fruit fly Drosophila and the nematode C. elegans. And so this is where this article comes into play. The article is called No. Let's see if I can get to the title here. No, this is not a fly uploaded to a computer. A lot of buzz, but not much evidence. And so this is about a startup, and I know that Morgan knows a startup where they're working on this sort of whole brain emulation, where they're able to simulate the brain, and then they talk more about consciousness than just kind of maybe like concrete behavioral states. But the idea is if you have a connectome and you know how it operates, then you can simulate everything about an organism. So it's just talking about this idea, talking about what's going on with Drosophila, talking about being able to upload a brain or upload an entire brain. And then of course you have, in this case, you have where you can simulate that connectome, and you can also simulate the physics of the body of a fly. So for the fly, you can simulate the connectome. You can also simulate the neuromechanics of the legs, and you can simulate movement in that fly. So that's forming what they call this closed loop feedback system, which is very indicative of a lot of sensory motor integration, where you have a signal going out that's derived from the activity of the connectome, plus sensory inputs at the previous time step that gets sent out to some limbs or effectors. Those limbs or effectors move. The sensory system brings information in at the next time step, and then that goes to the connectome, which processes an output. So it's a closed loop feedback system. So that's what we're dealing with as well. And so this just kind of goes around and thinks about a lot of sort of these problems and addresses the hype and things like that. So this is where, it becomes a philosophical argument. And, it's interesting, but it's not going to give us a lot of insight ultimately. Okay. So this part of the meeting is Morgan talking about this approach vis-a-vis, what he understands about brain emulation, which is quite a bit, and thinking about these problems and thinking about how that fits into the larger scheme of, a lot of the topics we're interested in. So then there's this other paper that's related. It's called The Digital Sphinx, Can a Worm Control Fly Body? This is where, to kind of demonstrate what's going on here, and maybe some of the pitfalls of what they're doing in whole brain emulation or in some of these closed loop systems. They took a C. elegans connectome and they simulated that, but they put it inside of a Drosophila biomechanical system. So basically, the Drosophila biomechanical system, which are the legs moving around, were driven by the C. elegans connectome. And so it's posed in this paper as the cautionary tale of thinking that a connectome is directly related to some sort of biomechanical model, and that describes movement when you can in fact simulate movement with any set of neurons if they produce sort of the right signals. So in other words, a C. elegans connectome can produce a forward and a backward signal. You could hook that up to a model of human biomechanics or neuromechanics and get similar things happening. Sometimes even things that look human. Like you could have a human model dance in different ways just by using one of these C. elegans neuromechanical controllers or connectomes. So that's I guess it's posed as a cautionary tale, but it also opens up its own set of philosophical questions. Okay, so then we talked about this paper a little bit. And then we talked about this last paper, Materials Inspired by Living Functions, which was about the state of material science and how material science is looking for sort of biologically inspired models or living models of materials. So it's a nice review of a lot of what's going on in that field, how they're kind of drawing from developmental biology, from physiology, from cell biology, and how they want to build models of materials that have memory. So materials have shape memory, and you can have a system that retains different shapes, and that's important for different applications. But what they'd like to have are materials that can incorporate associative learning or features of emergent structures or self-regulated designs. So this is kind of going over this. And so, in the past, the soft active materials community has contributed to developmental biology in sort of describing how different tissues operate, different tissues form and are maintained. And now we're getting this cross fertilization from biology back to material science. So these are just some figures in the paper where they describe things about shape memory and stimulus response and responsive changes in materials and their all resulting metastable state. And then we had some discussion on that. And then I think finally Shreyas, who's another applicant, GSOC applicant, went over his model just a little bit. This was the last meeting before proposals were due. So this was where we talked about his model of neural ODEs and modeling networks over time. And then Teng Hai, who is also an GSOC applicant, talked a little bit about his thoughts about that. All right, so that was our DevoWorm meeting, so the last 2 weeks. Well, I think that's it for our meetings. Yeah, there we go. That's very good. So do we have any questions or comments on that? So I want to go over something that Sean Guinness posted in the Slack. So Sean Guinness is interested in open science and open access and open source. And he's been in our Slack for a little while. I talked to him during an admin meeting a couple weeks ago. So he's very interested in sort of meta science and a lot of things having to do with these distributed research organizations, of which we are one. It's how he got into touch with us. And so he's been doing this survey of different distributed research organizations. He's been putting together a list of them and what their status is and how they're doing their work. So he's very interested in that. He actually posted a couple articles in the Slack this week, which I want to talk about. So the first is this Research Revival Fund, which is an experimental fund restoring neglected and eligible or prematurely dismissed research to active circulation. So this is an organization, researchrevival.org. And this just talks a little bit about their organization and their fund. So what we do, we support scholars, experimentalists, and original thinkers to excavate intellectual lineages, clarify claims, and make forgotten or marginalized inquiry legible again. Our work addresses a fundamental problem. Valuable research disappears not because it lacks merit, but because it lacks the infrastructure, language, or institutional alignment to survive. We provide that infrastructure. So that's interesting because sometimes you kind of make claims that are maybe not, maybe not wrong, but they don't have support within the traditional institutions. They don't use the same language in different fields because every field has its own jargon. And a lot of times if you're coming in from another field, or oftentimes if you're not immersed in that field, you can't really inherit that language in the same way. So there's like alignment there. There's also, funding and other types of infrastructure that can help. And those are all problems for ideas. Now, are there crackpot ideas still? Sure. But, sometimes there are good ideas that kind of fall by the wayside. And this is something they're trying to address. Number 2 is what we believe. So they believe that knowledge is material. Research gets lost through linguistic marginalization, institutional dismissals, unprofitable timing, or cultural illegibility. Research needs deliberate preservation. Number 2 is that discovery is nonlinear. The way knowledge emerges and reemerges is oftentimes winding, contingent, and influenced by shifting relevance. What seemed marginal in one era may prove essential in another. What appeared illegible within one framework may illuminate another. And then form reveals sensibility. So different artifacts reveal different sensibilities. We publish fluidly to work with the form for each research project that those projects demand, preserving diversity in ways of knowing. And so what did they support? So they fund projects unlikely to receive institutional support due to a couple of things. One is historical discontinuation. So this is where this is research that are delegitimized by shifting paradigms or prematurely abandoned due to funding loss. Two is interdisciplinary illegibility or disciplinary illegibility. And that is work that falls between established fields or challenges dominant frameworks. So this is where you have this sort of these disciplinary trends, and it falls outside those trends. Three is non-traditional outcomes. So projects producing artifacts beyond conventional academic articles. Four is linguistic or geographic marginalization. Research published in overlooked languages or cultural contexts. So there's a lot of research that's been published in areas that are not sort of maybe like the dominant areas of Western science. I think about in cybernetics that there was this school in London, the School of Thought, that was sort of the center of cybernetics, and there was an American counterpart to that. They were sort of connected, and those were sort of the main areas of what we remember today as the cybernetics of the mid to late 20th century. But at the same time, there were also other traditions of cybernetics. There was Soviet cybernetics, there was Chinese cybernetics, and they were writing in different languages. They were disconnected from those core areas of the discipline, but they were still doing work that's still very interesting and answering very important questions. And they're kind of connected through sort of the common set of ideas that you would have in cybernetics, but they're taking very different approaches to that. So it's kind of an interesting example of just taking cybernetics as an example of how that can happen. And it's very much like, if you're familiar with Emanuel Wallerstein's world systems theory, the idea that there's a sort of core, which is like the metropole of a region. And it usually has a lot of the influence, it has a lot of the wealth. And then you have these peripheral areas that serve as places where there's resource extraction, places that are marginalized, etc. But they're all part of the same system of development, economic development in this case. But in the case of academic research, it would be intellectual development. So it's very interesting how you can map those out and how they kind of fit together as sort of an object lesson in maybe power, maybe just influence. So that's interesting. Then the fifth one are alternative epistemologies. So this is where we have an epistemology when we do science or we do some sort of research. We have an epistemology that is basically a way of knowing or a language of knowing. And so this is where we have different ways of knowing, but they have to be on sort of the same rigorous footing as the sort of dominant way of knowing in a field. And so this is where we have this alternative epistemology where they kind of fund these alternative things. And so then types of projects we fund, a non-exhaustive list. The first is experiments testing unverified hypotheses from neglected papers. So sometimes we have papers that just kind of like don't go anywhere. People ignore them at the time that they're published. And they really do deserve maybe some further testing. Testing of hypotheses, thinking about the implications, etc. If you think about some of the early work in string theory, that's where that paper was not immediately embraced as sort of the having the influence that it soon would have. There's similar things in other fields as well. So this is something where, we have things that sometimes get neglected when they first get published, and then eventually resurface as these greatly influential papers. And sometimes they're papers that get kind of ignored at the time and never make it to becoming predominant, sort of having a predominant influence in the field, and maybe they should be. Maybe there should be more attention paid to these papers. Number 2 is continuing research along promising lines of inquiry that lost institutional support. And so this is where, again, that sometimes institutions fail to support certain areas of research for various reasons. And so or maybe sometimes funding agencies do the same thing. They de-emphasize certain approaches. They de-emphasize certain things. And so they're trying to pick up the slack there. The third is where we have recovery and curation of unpublished manuscripts, interviews, or proceedings. And so this is where, again, sometimes we have intellectual production that happens outside of the mainstream, or it happens and it disappears. Like, a lot of times we'll have conferences that disappear. They'll disappear from the publication record, or, they're not well archived in the first place, so we have this aspect of it. Number 4, original analysis examining overlooked research teams, labs, or intellectual traditions. This is where just kind of doing an analysis of what is missing or who's been ignored. And this is the case again of Chinese and Soviet cybernetics. These are systems that were closed off to the rest of the world for a long time, and they were constrained to their native languages, so they didn't have a lot of influence outside of that sphere. And so the idea is to kind of revisit those and see how they fit into broader intellectual traditions. Number 5 is translation and critical editions of historically significant texts in non-dominant languages. And again, this is this problem of science being published in different languages, sometimes inaccessible to other people. So and this is the case in science several hundred years ago, where they didn't use any kind of lingua franca. If there was a lingua franca in Western science, it was Latin, but a lot of times science wasn't done in Latin. It was done in the local languages. So you have, different schools of thought arise around those languages or along those national groupings. So for example, you had a German embryology, which was distinct from embryology in, like, say, England or in the United States. Or sometimes you would have, an American genetics and a European genetics. Or, and sometimes you had like an American philosophy and a continental philosophy. And those things would differ by their sort of region. And sometimes there were linguistic differences and stylistic differences as well. So there is this aspect of regionality that we need to kind of account for when we think about this. So these are small grants ranging from $4,000 up to $25,000. And then what they're not looking for is solitary theoretical work without material engagement, projects replicating what institutions already fund well, purely expressive or autobiographical work, explicit advocacy campaigns, which is like where your work has political implications, degree-seeking research as primary output, so they don't fund like dissertation work or whatever, criticism or debunking-oriented work, which is, a lot of the stuff where people will try to, just base the work purely on criticism or something like that. Okay, so then their position in the knowledge ecosystem. The goal of research revival is twofold. Number 1, to excavate forgotten or marginalized knowledge, and 2, to model alternative approaches to knowledge discovery itself. We complement institutional scholarship by funding and publishing work that cannot flourish without institutional constraints. We welcome academics and non-academics alike. The only criterion, relentless intellectual obsession and openness to unfamiliar ideas, methodologies, and collaborations. By making diverse approaches to inquiry tangible and public, research revival creates reference points, provocations that expand what seems possible in a wide range of inquiries. And those are scientific research, artistic creation, technological innovation, or humanistic investigation. Research revival builds towards an emerging ecosystem and open experimental publishing, where unconventional forms of inquiry can flourish and important ideas can find their way back into circulation. And so they have some blog posts here. Actually, these are magazine articles. This is the case for crazy philanthropy from Palladium magazine, and venture capital as lessons for government by the Good Science Project. Okay. So that's the Research Revival Fund. And then this is this Flux Capacitor program. So this is from the 1517 fund. There are no scientific revolutions without revolutionaries. And this is kind of going over this, I guess this is Arcturus. So this is Amir Marshall of Arcturus. And he has a lab, I guess it's in his home. I guess they're going to talk about this a little bit. So this is the Angel Check program, or 1517 Angel Check program. So a few years ago, we launched an Angel Check program where we called the Flux Capacitor. The idea was simple. One of the key choke points in American science is that our institutions don't trust younger scientists to do great work. The average age of first-time grant recipients tends to be about 40 to 45. This needs to drop by 20 years. So we created an off-ramp for insanely exceptional researchers who want to pause or leave their academic career by giving them the resources they need to commercialize their work or to jumpstart a moonshot science experiment outside of academia. Selected teams each receive a $100,000 US investment from us with the potential for more as progress is made, as well as a strong peer community of like-minded builders and mentorship from our team. So I guess this is one of the recipients. Since launching Flux, we've received hundreds of incredible applications from people like Amir Marshall working on a new type of conductive material to replace copper, and Olivia Kravitsky inventing a new super bandage that heals wounds faster, to people like David Hooper building new platforms for identifying and studying UAP. We noticed a pattern among the teams that seem to thrive. They have an unquenchable thirst for exploration and are experimentalists at heart. Many are also already working outside of academia or taking a break from their academic career because they just couldn't wait to explore their frontier of interest. They had to start building now. It's no secret that our current systems for advancing science and discovery are broken. Large funders act as gatekeepers that choose who and what gets funded. In many ways, academia has grown more obsessed with credentials and prestige than science itself. One could argue that over the last 100 years, the course of science has drifted more towards safe harbor and away from the horizon. Scientists today must even be careful which questions they ask out loud, lest they ruffle the feathers of mainstream science, this mainstream science machine. The endless ridicule and criticism that was piled on Avi Loeb over the last year for openly asking whether the 3-eye atlas might be something artificial, created by another intelligent life form in the cosmos, is a testament to how broken mainstream science is today. It's their kind of example. I'm not really sure if that was the best example they could give, but whatever. So that's okay. So humankind has never had a more urgent need for explorers. If we race into an increasingly chaotic future, we need those among us who are willing to go boldly where no man has gone before, and they're willing to risk it all to help us make sense of what lies ahead. So that's kind of the motivation here, and then the applications are here. So that's kind of the take on that. Yeah, so that's thank you to Sean for putting that in our Slack and drawing our attention to it. Yeah, so if you have something you really want me to bring up at a meeting, put it in the Slack, put it in the general channel or one of the topical channels, and I'll go over it. I guess Sarrah was here while I was doing the DevoWorm meetings. But yeah, Sarrah is one of the mentors for the open source sustainability larger language models project. And I wanted to actually talk to her a little bit about that, so I'll talk to her in the Slack. Okay, does anyone have anything they wanted to add in here? Okay, Kavya had a question here. Do you know about the new Tribe version 2 model by Meta? I wanted to know what are some good applications for it. Particularly, how can it be useful for neuroscience practitioners or clinics? I'm not familiar with Tribe version 2 yet. I'll have to look at it and see. But I've not encountered much about it.
It's actually an open source model. So basically, it predicts how it would respond to visual, audio.
Okay. Did you want to say anything about it, or?
Yeah, so I just wanted to tell that they have linked the papers and so the code base and the weights of the models.
So that's all open source.
Yeah.
All right. So this is Tribe version 2, a predictive foundation model trained to understand how the human brain processes complex stimuli. So this is a generalized model of human cognition, a zero-shot prediction of neural activity. And so the takeaways, we're introducing Tribe version 2, our next-gen model that acts as a digital twin of human neural activity. This offers unprecedented speed, accuracy, and a 70-fold resolution increase as compared to similar models to predict how the brain responds to almost any sight or sound, enabling neuroscientists and clinical researchers to test theories without requiring human subjects. We're releasing the model, codebase, paper, and interactive demo, as Kavya mentioned, to help researchers push the boundaries of neuroscience, apply brain insights to build better AI systems, and use computational simulation to accelerate breakthroughs in the treatment of neurological disorders. Understanding how the human brain processes the world around us is one of the greatest open challenges in neuroscience. Breakthroughs here could transform how we understand and treat neurological conditions affecting hundreds of millions of people, and improve AI systems by directly guiding their development from neuroscientific principles. So this is building on our Algonauts 2025 award-winning model. And this is a paper that they, I think we maybe talked about this paper once in the meetings. I know Morgan talked maybe about that a little bit at some point, but I don't remember. So this Algonauts 2025 award-winning model, which was trained on the low-resolution fMRI recordings of 4 individuals, allow us to leverage a massive data set of more than 700 healthy volunteers who are presented with a wide variety of media, including images, podcasts, videos, and text. Tribe version 2 reliably predicts high-resolution fMRI brain activity, enabling zero-shot predictions for new subjects, languages, and tasks, and consistently outperforms standard modeling approaches. By creating a digital model of the human brain, researchers can rapidly test hypotheses about its underlying functions without the need for human subjects in every experiment. To accelerate the pace of neuroscience discovery and open up new avenues for clinical practice, we're sharing a research paper along with model weights and code under an open source Creative Commons license. We also invite everyone to explore Tribe version 2 on our demo website. And so this is a link to some of the papers. So they have the model here, which is on Hugging Face. This is Tribe version 2. This is a deep multimodal brain encoding model that predicts fMRI brain responses to naturalistic stimuli, video, audio, and text. And then it combines state-of-the-art feature extractors. So for text, it uses Llama 3.2. For video, VJPA 2. And for audio, Wave2Vec BERT. So this is these are all models in these domains, and it's kind of unifying this into a transformer architecture that maps multimodal representations onto the cortical surface. So if you want to use their pre-trained model, you load the pre-trained model from Tribe version 2. This is in Python, so you're loading Tribe version 2. You're importing the Tribe model. Your model then is defined as this pre-trained model. You're building a data frame, which is where you're getting the events. You have this from this video file. Then you have predictions and segments. You're predicting events from this data frame, and then you're printing out the shape of or what they call preds.shape, which is the number of vertices and the number of time steps. So it's a, I guess, dynamic model of the brain network. So that's basically what it is. Predictions are for the average subject and live on this cortical mesh. You can also pass text path or audio path to model get events data frame. The text is automatically converted to speech and transcribed to obtain worm level timings. So they have a Colab demo notebook here. They have a Colab notebook here that is kind of goes through. So you have to set this up in Colab. You load the model. You predict the brain responses to a video. And this is just like kind of a little bit more detail what they showed in that little code, codelet on the last page. Then you run the model, and you visualize predictions on the brain surface. So then you create a figure here where you're plotting out the time steps, you're plotting out the segments instead of the edges, and then you are kind of fixing the parameters of this. So you have the video here, and this just has the video frames, the audio, so it has the waveform of the audio, and then it has the brain response here over time. So it's just modeling it at different time steps. So this is where it's predicting brain responses to text via text-to-speech. So Tribe version 2 can also predict brain responses to text input. Since the model is trained on naturalistic audio and video stimuli, text is first converted to speech using Google Text-to-Speech, or GTTS, then transcribed back to obtain precise word level timings. So the example here is from Shakespeare's Hamlet, and this is text. So this is where it's going to predict this text. It produces a table here that is where you have the type of input for each time step. You have the starting point and the duration. Then you have this file path, like where do you get this data from? So that's there. And then you have the text, which in this case for text here is this quote up above. For the sentence, it's to be or not to be, and it just shows like how it decomposes all of this. And then you run the model. So you run the model, and you again get this model where it takes each word and the associated waveform, and it shows the neural response. So it's this text-to-speech conversion. It's converting the text to these waveforms. It's matching and predicting that. Then it's mapping that onto the brain to predict what brain areas would be active. Again, this is all based on a limited data set. So it's, it's basically saying that if I give you this stimulus, this is how the average brain responds, or this is how individuals' brains will respond, and that's what it's actually mapping onto the human brain surface. So it's a nice little model, I think. And so the paper here is a foundation model of vision, audition, and language for in-silico neuroscience. This is, just basically being able to do neuroscience. Basically you're exploring different hypotheses, basically. So it's a simulation. So they describe Tribe version 2 as a trimodal foundation model capable of predicting human brain activity in a variety of naturalistic and experimental conditions. Leveraging a unified dataset over 1,000 hours of fMRI across 720 subjects, we demonstrate that our model accurately predicts high-resolution brain responses for novel stimuli tasks in subjects, superseding traditional linear encoding models, delivering several-fold improvements in accuracy. Critically, Tribe version 2 enables in-silico experimentation tested on seminal visual neural linguistic paradigms. It recovers a variety of results established by decades of empirical research. Finally, by extracting interpretable latent features, Tribe version 2 reveals the fine-grained topography of multisensory integration. These results establish artificial intelligence as the unifying framework for exploring the functional organization of the human brain. Okay, so there you go. And then this last paper here, which is this Algonauts model. So this is an arXiv paper from 2025, insights from the Algonauts 2025 winners. And so this is the Algonauts 2025 challenge. This is a challenge in computational neuroscience in which teams attempt to build models that predict human brain activity from carefully curated stimuli. Previous editions focused on still images and short videos. The 2025 edition, which concluded last month in late July, pushed the field further by using long multimodal movies. Teams were tasked with predicting fMRI responses across 1,000 whole brain parcels across 4 participants in the dataset who were scanned while watching nearly 80 hours of naturalistic movie stimuli. These recordings came from the CNeuroMod project and included 65 hours of training data, about 55 hours of Friends episodes, season 1 through 6, plus 4 feature films, The Born Supremacy, Hidden Figures, Life, and The Wolf of Wall Street. So there are 4 movies, 55 hours of sitcom, and it's going to learn about pop culture, I guess. The remaining data were used for validation. Season 7 of Friends for in-distribution tests, and the final winners for the challenge were who could best predict brain activity from 6 films in their held out of distribution set. All right. So that's, and then the winners were just announced, and the top team reports are now publicly available. And as members of the MEDARC team, which placed 4th in the competition, we want to reflect on the approaches that worked, what they reveal about the current state of brain encoding, and what might come next. So for this competition, there were a bunch of entries. There was Tribe, of course, but then there were others. And so the meta people, of course, told us all about Tribe, but that was only one of the projects. So the overall observations across all the projects, the first is reliance on pre-trained feature extractors. And so no top team trained their own feature extractors. The universal strategy was to use pre-trained foundation models to convert stimuli into high-quality feature representations. The core engineering challenge was how to integrate these features and align them with fMRI brain activity. Number 2 is that multimodality was essential. So following from the first point, every top team used pre-trained models spanning vision, audio, and language, predicting activity in higher order associated brain regions, in particular required the model to process multimodal features. So we needed multimodality, like we saw in the Tribe model. Then that's essential to having a high degree of success here. Number 3 is that architecture didn't really matter. So for this case, if you look at the different teams, first and second place teams used transformers, third place used RNNs, fourth place was simply convolutions and linear layers, which didn't introduce any nonlinearity, and sixth place used seek-to-seek transformers. Despite these differences, the final leaderboard scores were all extremely tight, and actually the winning teams were decided by how they implemented the model ensembling. So this is interesting that transformers won, but they weren't really dominant. And so it was really not about that architecture. It was more about how they actually implemented the model. So this is, I think we had this conversation several months ago now in the meetings about what are alternatives to transformers, or what comes after transformers in a lot of these models. Like, in other words, at one point we didn't use transformers, and then transformers came on the scene, and they kind of became the state of the art. But what happens, what comes next, and what are the sort of the alternatives to transformers for maybe the new state of the art? This suggests that maybe there are, that transformers aren't going to dominate forever. It also suggests that other approaches aren't necessarily any worse, and that maybe there are some opportunities to think about improving performance by having hybrid transformers / other types of architectures. It's just an interesting conversation, and but suffice it to say, we have an example here of how we can think about this. The fourth observation is ensembling decided the winner, as we mentioned in the last point. All top teams used ensembling of some sort. Averaging model variance, often with sophisticated per parcel weighting, was the most effective way to gain noticeable performance improvements. Tribes seemed to use the most sophisticated ensembling strategy, which we think determined the first place finish. So the tribe, of course, was the first place team, but they weren't dominant. So tribe stands for a trimodal brain encoder, and that's why they call it tribe. And this was the meta AI team of Diascoli, Rapin, Benchetrit, Banville, and King. Stefan Diascoli was the lead on this team, and they used, of course, this tribe model, which employed the general multimodal strategy that all the Algonauts teams used. And then this kind of, unlike some of the other top teams, tribe only used unimodal models and did not use intrinsically multimodal models like QN 2.5 Omni or Intern VL3. Hence, it seems that while combining features from all modalities was essential for all teams, using intrinsically multimodal models was not. So I don't know what they mean by intrinsic multimodality, but they basically used all modalities, they just didn't combine them in the same way. Looking at the final leaderboard, Tribe performed noticeably better than all the rest in terms of the average Pearson correlation across the 1,000 brain parcels. However, digging into the papers a bit more, Aaron et al.'s team used in second place actually had a submission that scored 0.2125 average accuracy that was not submitted in time. I guess they maybe missed the deadline or something. Likewise, our own Medarc paper discusses how we would place second with an average accuracy of 0.2117 if we were provided one additional hour to finalize our submissions. Okay, so there was a deadline. In both these cases, the performance increases simply come from better model ensembling. All of this to say that if the top teams were actually incredibly close in terms of final performance, so this was the leaderboard kind of showing this. I think, Morgan has talked about Medarc quite a bit. And so this is part of this they were part of this competition. The tribe model was part of this competition, etc. So this is the final out of distribution leaderboard for the Algonauts 2025 challenge. In our opinion, the key innovations unique to tribe were threefold. And the first was modality dropout during training, which forced the model to remain robust even when a modality such as audio was missing. This is a simple and intuitive solution that was likewise especially useful given the silent black and white Charlie Chaplin film in the out of distribution set. The second is a parcel-specific ensembling scheme. Rather than averaging all models equally, they computed validation performance per model, per brain parcel, and use those scores as softmax weights. The temperature for the softmax can control how aggressively you dial the ranking. So, for example, capital T approaching 0 means winner take all. Capital T approaching infinity means pure averaging. So these different strategies for softmax and how they're implemented. Careful analysis showing that multimodal models systematically outperform unimodal models and higher order associative cortices, reinforcing the idea that complex brain regions integrate multiple sensory streams. So this is basically this is sort of a theory of visual processing in the brain, that the higher level visual areas are integrating a lot of information from auditory cortex, from sensory motor cortex, and the lower parts, I mean the brain, the visual system is shaped as sort of a hierarchy where you have lower level areas that process a lot of the patches and blobs and other things in visual scenes, and then those things get built up into feature spaces that become images, and then those images are connected to other modalities for, sort of in the higher parts of the visual stream. And so that's kind of what they're getting at here. And so they say that they're replicating this with these kinds of models. They're doing the similar thing. Okay. Further, Tribe's report suggests that encoding performance increases with more training sessions, up to 80 hours per subject. So this means that the more data you collect, the more you have people engage with the stimuli and then record those data and then use that in the model. It's better for the model. Encoding performance increases, which makes sense because, of course, we have a wider variety of contexts and we have more data that kind of gives the model hints as to how this happens. And so this is not to be, you shouldn't be surprised at this. However, the trend appears sublinear and plateauing. So, you can't do that infinitely and get infinite gains. It works up to a point and then there's not much to learn about it. In any case, it's not the clean power law seen in large language models, and we still look forward to an eventual clean scaling law paper for neuroimaging and coding models. So they don't get this kind of scaling law that people talk about all the time with large language models. They get this sort of messier kind of scaling law for neuroimaging and coding models, although they're convinced that there is one, but who knows. So this is just kind of a diagram here. These are so this is the architecture of the Meta AI's Tribe model, which views text, audio, and video representations with a transformer to predict cortical responses. So for text, we're using Llama 3.23b. For audio, we're using Wave2Vec 2, which is a BERT model. And then for video, we're using VJPA 2. And then for each one, we have an FFN. So we have the text FFN, audio FFN, video FFN for the encoding. And then we have these dynamical embeddings. And we have this transformer that's linking together the modalities. And we have this pooling. And then we have our subject layer that leads to our predictions. And those predictions are ground truthed. We use a Pearson's correlation from the predictions to correlate those with the ground truth. And then we have a loss function, which is the thing that we try to improve upon. So when we don't have the results we would like in the ground truth, from the ground truth, we minimize the loss and get a better performance. Okay, so that's the first place. The second place model was this Vibe video input brain encoder. This is, of course, from Max Planck Institute. The Vibe's architecture consisted of a modality fusion transformer and a prediction transformer, which helps separate the challenges of multimodal feature integration from modeling temporal dynamics of the fMRI time series. So they use this modality fusion transformer. This integrated features from numerous models like QN 2.5, LABSC for text, Beats and Whisper for audio, Slow Fast, VJPA2, and QN 2.5 Omni for vision. These features are fused across to cross attention to create a single unified representation per time point. So they're using what they call cross attention to fuse the features together. Then their prediction transformer models temporal dependencies across time points. So this is where the prediction transformer, gives us dependency data. The authors trained the model without a causal mask, allowing it to attend to future time points. This yielded a slight performance increase, suggesting that information about future stimuli helps predict present brain responses. Okay, so this is, they maximize performance by ensembling 20 models, which happened to also be the sweet spot for our MEDARC submission, achieving a final mean correlation of 0.2125 on the out-of-distribution movies. They use separately trained models to predict brain parcels based on the different functional networks they belong to. The authors also experimented with explicitly modeling the hemodynamic response function. Both approaches that they used in this case decreased performance, leading them to conclude that the model's internal transformer architecture was more effective at learning the nuanced temporal delays on its own than a rigid predefined HRF. So this is the transformer architecture for Vibe. These are the visual features, audio features, and textual features. They go into this modality fusion transformer, which is shown here. You have different subjects that are kind of giving this model data. Then you have this rope embedding, and then the prediction transformer, which is here. And then we have our prediction and our target, and we minimize the loss on that to get the best performance we can. Then third place was this multimodal recurrent ensemble. This was also from Max Planck. And this is basically this approach took a different route with a hierarchical recurrent architecture. They used slow-fast video MAE, Swin transformer, and clip to extract features for visual input, Hubert and Wave LM for speech audio, Clap for semantic audio embeddings, BERT for local text semantic features, and Longformer to extract longer-range textual content by prepending the previous episode's transcripts when extracting language features. And then a key design choice which differed from some of the other teams was how the authors handled temporal information. While the team that is writing this paper relied on feature extraction models themselves to capture temporal content by feeding them longer 20-second clips, the SDA team extracted features on a strict TR by TR basis. This created a sequence for each time step corresponded to an isolated 1.49 second moment of the stimulus. Okay, so that's kind of what they were doing there. Independent feature sequences were fed into their own dedicated bidirectional long short-term memory blocks, or LSTMs, allowing for future and past stimulus features to better understand the context of their current time step when predicting the corresponding fMRI signal. So this is the architecture here. They have the visual features, the audio features, and the language features. There's this average pooling. This is fed into an RNN, which can be an LSTM or GRU. We have this for the different subjects. And then these LSTMs are fed into a final model, which is a 100-seat ensemble. The team that is writing this paper, which is the MEDARC team, boasts the most architecturally simple approach. We gathered features from 5 distinct models of VJPA2 for vision, Wespers for speech, Llama 3.2 for language, in turn VL3 for vision language, QN 2.5 Omni for vision language audio, and align them temporally to the fMRI signals. They're just using these combinations of different models some unimodal, some multimodal, and then aligning them temporally to the fMRI signals. So their approach is devoid of transformers or any nonlinear operations. And this was actually quite competitive with the more complex models. So this is, kind of proof that you can use very simple approaches and be competitive in that way. So the Metric team's architecture simply used convolutional and linear layers in combination. Okay, so I think that's good. I don't know. Thank you, Kavya, for that link and going through that. Did we have any comments or questions about that?
So, do you think there are actual applications for it in healthcare or actual practice in neuroscience?
I think as a predictive model, they might be quite good at answering certain questions, but I think also, looking at kind of like, how, I guess, like it's a computational neuroscience question, right? Like, can we predict how the brain is activated, what parts of the brain are activated from different stimuli? So you're training these models on people who have experienced things, and we know kind of that certain parts of the brain are activated when you get certain stimuli. And so kind of building a predictive model from that is pretty important, I think, for maybe understanding how brains work over time. So when we do experiments, they're very sort of focused on a specific task or a specific setup. If we can expand it out to more naturalistic settings, like movies or TV shows, then we can, maybe show how the brain works in a sort of naturalistic regime and get some handle on, brain dynamics, basically, which is hard to measure experimentally. I think Morgan probably could speak to that better because he's set him in that space. He's done a lot of that. Hi.
Yeah, so you asked for updates. I don't really have many updates for this week. So, firstly, I had a lot of proposal review iterations with Sarrah, and I was trying to update all the mentors with it. So that was one thing. Then, I'll show you something that happened in college this week. So we have this subject. You can see my screen, right? Yeah. So we have this subject called MIS, which is Management Information Systems, and that's a part of our course curriculum, you can say. So we had a lecture this week where we were discussing about how the corporate world migrates to open source, and we had a big discussion on this topic and majorly these questions. So I just thought of taking a picture from class and then showing it in like today's meeting or something. So yeah, that was this small thing that we were discussing about how Linux and other open source software help the companies, like how they help the companies, and how basically open source is important, not just like GSOC is just one application of open source, or rather where open source is extremely used. But like a lot of companies also use them. So that was one thing. Then apart from this, actually, there were two major things that happened in this week. One was that Claude code's the source code got leaked accidentally, and like it was about 50,000 plus, 50,000 plus code lines were leaked. So like the model was not leaked, and even the weights of the model, like even the weights that are involved, they were not leaked, but a major issue happened over there. So that was one major thing that happened this week that we happened to discuss in college. And yeah, like a lot of companies have been having mass layoffs. Like earlier it was just Fang, but then recently even Oracle had a major layoff this week. I think about 30,000 employees were laid off. So yeah, I think that's what's going on. Just a weekly thing.
Yeah, I think that's great. The Claude code leak, I think that was kind of interesting. So, did you? What were the thoughts about that within your group?
I mean, I don't know. I just thought that it's like we thought that the Oracle mass layoffs and all the companies that are having mass layoffs are because of Claude code, but like we don't know. Like obviously, a lot of people can implement something like Cloud Code. But then there's one more important thing that I mentioned, that the weights that they used were not leaked. So, I mean, it has problems. But then there was a time where we, like, I think a year, like a year ago, we were like, oh, ChatGPT. And then we had Grok and a lot of things emerging. And then now Cloud Code, like Claude and then Cloud Code. So yeah, eventually in future, there will be something else that we would value more. Not value more, but then we would know that this AI is more powerful than the other. So, yeah.
Yeah, the weights
What
are
are
kind
your
of like
thoughts on
this.
it?
What's that?
Oh, what are your thoughts on it?
Oh, the weights are kind of one of the most important parts of the model. So,
Yeah. But then, like, still, like 50,000 lines plus have been leaked from the open source code. So,
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's always like kind of provocative when you release something that was
right.
proprietary or accidentally, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, happens.
So yeah, what are your what in your group there? What are their thoughts about like agentic coding and things like that? You said that they had thought that was a large reason for the layoffs, but what are their other
Yeah,
thoughts
because
about
they
it?
thought that, yeah, I mean, like, we didn't have many thoughts. We all use all these AIs. So, we know, like, it's interesting about how they work. But then when the whole leak happened, we were like, oh my God. Like, there was one time where something was down. The cloud was down for something, so GPT and all were not working. I forgot what fault that was. But something was
The
down in
Cloudflare was
December,
down.
November.
Cloudflare.
Yeah, the Cloudflare was down, yeah. So there was that. And then, yeah, I mean, we are not working in the company right now, so we wouldn't experience it first-handly. But we do use these AIs, so it does affect us a bit. But then we find alternatives, so it doesn't affect us much because they fix it in a few hours. So,
Good. Yeah. Interesting. All right. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So thanks to Vidhi and Kavya for doing this. For so having some points to discuss. That was interesting stuff. This is something that Hussain has been working on. Hussain, of course, is a member of the lab. He's been working on a lot of different things over the past several years. He actually started as a GSOC student. So he was working on the open source sustainability project. And, he had some interesting work during that period, but he's really kind of blossomed into a really prolific researcher, I think, at this point. And he's really, he has a lot of really interesting sort of things he wants to pursue. He's been working on, he's interested in virtual reality and philosophy. He's interested in physics and physical modeling. So he's working on a number of things in the OpenWorm area and the DevoWorm area. He's working on a number of things on the side of Orel. So this it's a lot of good stuff going on there. But he has this new theory that he is interested in. It's called pressure control chaos, and he's been writing a manuscript on this, and he's trying to shop it around to different journals to see who wants to publish this. So it's a theory of self-assembly, I guess, a theory of complexity. So it's kind of like not a theory of everything, but definitely a complexity type theory. And so we talked. I was looking over his manuscript, and we got to talking about how that is very similar to what in cybernetics is called the Good Regulator Theorem. So there's this paper by W.R. Ashby called the Good Regulator Theorem. And so the Good Regulator Theorem is this. It's a mathematical paper, and it's not sort of a modern paper in the sense that it's implemented in code. It's just a theoretical paper about what makes a good regulator, or what makes a system able to regulate itself effortlessly. And it's a really interesting paper because it suggests that there's a very simple model involved and that there are very simple principles involved. And so we've been coming back to this paper a lot, coming back to this approach of the ever good regulator. And so that's kind of where this table comes from. So what we're doing here is we're comparing this pressure control chaos theory to the ever good regulator theorem in an attempt to say, like, okay, this is my theory that I have for stuff happening in nature, complex phenomena, and I want to see how it compares to the good regulator theorem. Basically, I want to see if I'm making similar predictions, if I'm asking similar questions, and perhaps if some of the things I'm doing are unique, or, and then we can take those ideas and then take them to real world systems and then test them out and see what's going on and kind of suss out a lot of the different components of a theory. Because remember, a theory is where you're making predictions, but it's also where you have a lot of moving parts in terms of the mechanisms and some of the principles that you're drawing from. And so, we think about the ever good regulator theorem, it's dealing with a lot of physical aspects of systems, a lot of natural aspects of systems, but it's modeling them as sort of a general model. So that's also what pressure control chaos is trying to do, model a wide variety of systems using a single unified framework. So this was something, and I can't remember how, I think this was generated from an agent where there was a query, we're comparing the two approaches. And then we have these different dimensions. So this is, so the core question here is, in pressure control chaos, why do some systems fail to stabilize despite regulation? And in the good regulator theorem, the core question is, what is required for a system to be effectively controlled? So this is, I'm comparing this here with the good regulator theorem, but you have other theories of complexity that could also be summarized here. So like chaos theory, for example, asks a core question. Theories of self-organization ask a core question, which are maybe similar to this or a little bit different. And so the value here is to say, like, what is your core question? How does it vary from other theories? What are you adding to the, to the area of complexity? What are we learning with this theory that's new? Okay, so then the primary focus of pressure control chaos is in instability, structure, and cyclic dominance. So this is like the thing that it's trying to predict. And there are a lot of connections between pressure control chaos and game theory. So we talked, I think, so Hussain presented in DevoWorm on this, and he mentioned that there are these games, there are these rock, paper, scissors games that you can use to model different types of ethological behaviors, like the behavior of side-blotch lizards. They also have competitions for rock, paper, scissors in computer science, where they try to model that type of relationship. And these cyclic games are notorious for being non-transitive, meaning that A is maybe greater than B, B is greater than C, but sometimes A is greater than C, or stuff like that. And it's it's non-transitive, so it doesn't follow the rules of transitivity, and it makes for some interesting dynamics. But anyways, comparing pressure control chaos to the good regulator theorem, the good regulator theorem's primary focus is that control and regulation occur via internal modeling. So there's quite a bit of difference between the primary focus of these two theories, but the core question is maybe similar. And so you think about, like, how do you develop this theory further vis-a-vis the good regulator theorem? What are we adding? How does it fit in? Can we use the good regulator theorem mechanisms in pressure control chaos and stuff like that? The system type in pressure control chaos, we're interested in predicting multi-agent, competitive, and non-transitive systems. In the Good Regulator Theorem, we're interested in modeling a controller system relationship where we have regulators and environments working together to regulate the system. So this is where we have very different systems that we're interested in modeling. The key principles of each for pressure control chaos, it's where stability emerges or fails from interacting forces. And so this is where we have different forces. Pressure, choose P, C is control, and CH is chaos. So those are interacting. And then in the Good Regulator Theorem, effective regulation requires an internal model of the system. So there's this internal model concept in the Good Regulator Theorem that doesn't apply to pressure control chaos, but then again, you could use an internal model analog in pressure control chaos and get different results. The view of stability in pressure control chaos is often non-convergent, oscillatory, or metastable, which is where we have these different states of stability and of sort of equilibrium. And then in the Good Regulator Theorem, equilibrium or stability is achievable if the regulator sufficiently models the system. And so the equilibrium concept itself in pressure control chaos is not central. You might have things that are metastable or other types of loose stability that are equilibrium. In the Good Regulator Theorem, equilibrium is an implicit goal. So we want to maintain systems near a desired state. So like most theories of chaos, pressure control chaos does not really operate. It operates what we call out of equilibrium. The dynamics of pressure control chaos systems are intrinsically cyclic and non-transitive, hence the discussion about the rock, paper, scissors games. In Good Regulator Theorem, the dynamics are typically feedback-driven stabilization or corrective by the environment, and very much models of stability and equilibrium. Then the role of control in pressure control chaos is where one component acts among a bunch of others. There's no dominant component. And it's very similar to this concept of heterarchy, which is where you don't have a hierarchy where one level controls another level below it. You have interacting levels that can sometimes control each other, but sometimes are controlled by other layers. So there's no, we think about strict hierarchies, where one thing influences another thing influences another thing. That's not the case here. It's very much kind of a mixed bag of what controls what. And then in the Good Regulator Theorem, by contrast, control is central and control is the defining mechanism. And then the role of chaos noise in pressure control chaos is fundamental. It disrupts and prevents causal closure, which means that it basically doesn't allow for a system to be finalized or stable in the sense that the relationships don't change over time. And as opposed to the Good Regulator Theorem, where disturbances are treated as disturbances that can need to be minimized or optimized. And so pressure control chaos is not a theory of optimization. It's a theory of change, essentially. The role of pressure in pressure control chaos drives directional change / exploitation. And in the Good Regulator Theorem, this is not explicitly modeled. So when we're talking about the role of these different things, we want to think about what kind of model is this? Is this a model of control, or we're interested in control, or are we interested in causal closure? Are we interested in, or is this a theory of change or a theory of stability? And this, sometimes we can use two different theoretical models to model two different types of things in our system. So if we're interested, say, in developmental systems or neural systems, a lot of times neural systems or developmental systems will have aspects of stability, aspects of equilibrium, but they'll also have aspects of change and aspects of inherent instability. or non-transitivity. So we might use one theory to describe one set of things and another theory to describe another set of things, and bring them together. This is maybe one of the reasons why theory in neuroscience is quite hard, because you have a lot of different things going on, and it's hard to say this is the one thing that defines these kinds of systems. Then, in the interest of time, I'm going to go through some of these other points. We have the role of information theory, which is in pressure control chaos distributed across components, where we use entropy as sort of the key factor. And then in Good Regulator Theorem, information is a central role where it just is involved in entropy reduction through better modeling. So if you can better model your system, you can reduce entropy and increase information, whereas in pressure control chaos, information is more distributed. The failure of pressure control chaos is structural instability, which is built into the system topology. In the Good Regulator Theorem, failure is informational, where you have failure due to model mismatch. The scalability of pressure control chaos models naturally extends to multi-agent systems, whereas for the Good Regulator Theorem, it typically is framed as a single regulator versus a system. And then the philosophical framing of pressure control chaos is where stability is relational and dynamic, versus in the Good Regulator Theorem, where stability is achieved through knowledge. And then the blind spot of pressure control chaos is where it does not yet formalize optimal control strategies. And for the Good Regulator Theorem, its blind spot is that it does not address competitive or non-transitive dynamics. So a lot of good stuff there, a lot of thinking about different theories and how they kind of compare and how we can use them. Sometimes we like to use ensembles of theories to describe systems if they're sufficiently complex. This is another thing from Morgan's repository. He is doing a lot of work on agentic coding, and he's setting things up in JAX, a lot of sort of tests from our own work in Orthogonal Lab and DevoWorm. So this is one of the things he did was this repository called Spinning Up ELF. So this is spinning up active inference. This is a 16-module curriculum bridging reinforcement learning and active inference in JAX. So this is called Spinning Up Active Inference. So it's a way to sort of put together a course that bridges reinforcement learning and active inference. So there are a bunch of notebooks in this course where there are a bunch of demos. There are these utilities, and then there are these different things in here. So the description of this is from Thorndike's Cats to the Free Energy Principle, a hands-on curriculum bridging reinforcement learning and active inference. And so the description here is that in 1898, Thorndike's cats learned to escape puzzle boxes by trial and error. So Thorndike was an early psychologist who did these experiments with cats where they had to sort of figure out how to get out of a box or escape a box. And then in 1948, Tolman, who was another early psychologist and neurologist, showed that rats built cognitive maps. So if you're familiar with spatial cognition, there's this concept of the cognitive map, and it goes back to Tolman. And this is related to what Thorndike was doing at the turn of the last century. In 1997, Schultz revealed that dopamine neurons compute prediction errors, the same signal as the TD learning algorithm proposed a decade earlier, TD being a component of reinforcement learning temporal differencing. So this is like tracing this intellectual lineage from like spatial cognition to problem solving to then the sort of the basis for reward when you make the right decision and the right prediction. So what in 1997 was found was that dopamine neurons actually are the thing that is the unit of reward, because it basically controls prediction error. So it allows people or animals to minimize their error when they make the right decision. And so this is where you have temporal differencing over time to evaluate your options, to evaluate the decisions that you've made in the past versus the decisions you're making in the present. So there's a lot of intellectual territory, and of course, the concept of reinforcement learning predates 1997, and that's because reinforcement learning or behaviorism was a sort of the dominant paradigm of neuropsychology and psychology before cognitive science came about. So that was in the earlier part of the 20th century. So we did a lot of reinforcement learning experiments or different types of behaviorist experiments back then, but we didn't necessarily have a good handle on sort of the accounting of reinforcement learning. That is, what is the thing that's driving it? And I did a feature in the meeting probably about a year ago now that went over how this finding in 1997 was great, but too many people have leaned into it as like an absolute truth. And it turns out that dopamine does a lot of other things in the brain. So sometimes we have these findings that seem nice and neat, and then we spend more time on them and we find out that maybe they're not as nice and neat as we would like. So just an aside there on reinforcement learning and sort of inference. But anyways, this curriculum traces that intellectual lineage from animal behavior experiments through modern reinforcement learning into what we call active inference and the free energy principle. And of course, the active inference and the free energy principle was something that was proposed in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it was, kind of a new approach to inference and how to think about adaptive behavior. And so this is kind of leading us into this era of active inference and the free energy principle. And so this is the curriculum that allows you to sort of implement this stuff in code. You will implement every algorithm, say every correspondence, and understand why these two frameworks, seemingly so different, are solving the same problem. This is interesting because I've been kind of exploring this, or we've been exploring this in our different talks to the Active Inference Institute. So we've been presenting at the Active Inference Institute Symposium the last 2 years, and haven't had an explicit talk on this. But in the talks that we have had in the last 2 years, there's been this connection between reinforcement learning and active inference, mainly in terms of the math of the different approaches. But I think maybe this year might be the year that we kind of go into that direct comparison of reinforcement learning and active inference, and what is the connection there. I think that'd be, maybe this is like going to be a key component of that talk, running through these notebooks and seeing if we can kind of gain some new insight into this. And sometimes you're saying you're solving the same problem, but sometimes they're very interesting and important differences as well. So this is modeled in that OpenAI is spinning up an RL course and is designed as a pre-course introduction to NeuroMatch's Academy computational neuroscience curriculum. So it's kind of taken from these different curricula and then refactored into JAX. So this is kind of a unique course that draws on other courses. So there are these different components here where we have reinforcement learning algorithms, we have active inference, the free energy principle, the reinforcement learning active inference bridge, neuroscience grounding, animal behavior history, Bayesian brain, differentiable inference, GPU accelerated AIF, multi-agent / social, embodied robotics, primary language, and environments. So all these things are kind of unified in this curriculum, whereas it's covered maybe sporadically in the other curricula. So I like this curriculum because it kind of goes over everything here It gives you the sort of the basis for reinforcement learning algorithms. It gives you this sort of basis for active inference algorithms, which are different. The free energy principle, which also has different algorithms and different mathematical formalizations. Then you have the neuroscience grounding, so you need to know the history, what the findings are, what people, kind of where this is coming from in terms of neuroscience. The animal behavior, which is different, it's ethological, and as such, you're going to have a lot of different types of things, different types of experiments done. It covers specifically reinforcement schedules, cognitive maps, Tinbergen's 4 questions. So it's very different than the neuroscience grounding, which is more about dopamine signaling, successor representations, cognitive map building instead of following cognitive maps, and then some of this other type of behavioral choice studies. And then, of course, the work of Pavlov, which is conditioning. Then there's the Bayesian brain, which is where we have these different models of predictive mechanisms in the brain, Helmholtz variational inference, generative models and belief propagation, which is sort of core stuff in active inference. And so, yeah, there's this Bayesian sort of focus, and of course you could have a non-Bayesian focus as well. It's just that a lot of this has been developed through Bayesian modeling and statistics. Then there's differentiable inference, which is where we have Jackstad-Grad that moves through the forward algorithm. We have these learning A-B choice matrices from data. We have GPU-accelerated active inference. We have this other multi-agent social, expanding this to a multi-agent social context. We have an expansion to the embodied robotics area, which includes things like proprioceptive inference and continuous forms of active inference. And then these kind of environments where, or these test beds where you can use different types of modeling environments to make the behavior explicit. So remember, we're doing simulations, so we need to model the behavior. So for OpenAI, they use Mujoko, which is that physics simulator we talked about that people were using to model the neuromechanics of Drosophila. We have the Hugging Face Deep RL course, which uses a variety of environments, including Atari games, Unity, Vizdoom, and Godot. And then for the Neuromatch Academy, they have custom tutorials and custom environments. For this curriculum, they're using NeuroNav Grid Worlds, PyBullet, and that is sort of something that is different from the other examples. Okay, so what is the gap that's being filled by this course? No existing resource teaches reinforcement learning and active inference side by side in the same environments with escalating complexity, grounded in the animal behavior research that motivated both frameworks. Spinning Up teaches reinforcement learning but not active inference. That's the OpenAI course, whereas Hugging Face teaches practical deep learning, reinforcement learning, but no theory of mind. NeuroMatch covers Bayesian inference in 1 day of reinforcement learning, but never mentions the free energy principle. We bridge all three. So this is great because I think, especially with like the NeuroMatch course, this is something that, for one thing, a lot of these courses have to make decisions on what to include. Like I know the NeuroMatch course was time constrained. So what is the most important stuff we can learn about this area? And then that importance criterion is often like, it's the particular group that's working on it. So, you have to say like, what are the most important things you need to know about this thing, about X? And then, you make a list of things, and oftentimes that maybe isn't complete. So I think this is great because it kind of rethinks like what's important to learning these things. And, so a lot of times we do make those decisions when we're designing curricula. So we're making decisions about what to include, what not to include. So again, yeah, this is a great curriculum, and it's all kind of on Morgan's GitHub here with these different parts. You walk through the different notebooks, and yeah, so check it out. Looks like Morgan's here, and he's ready to go.
Yeah, well, I my ears were burning, and there's also some things that again, I'm trying. This is an experiment,
Yeah.
right? And I've got some papers that Claude has written. Again, you can find these on my GitHub, and it's I'm very happy with the output.
Yeah.
But there's always there's something subtle. There's always something subtle where it's just like Claude's not wrong, but it's but I wouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
And so which again is a part of the learning, right?
Yeah.
This is why did Claude say that? Because because I know the prompts,
Right.
I know what I said, right? And of course, probably the largest guide to what you see in spinning up in ALF is Brian Smith's step-by-step tutorial in active inference.
Yeah.
Right. But why isn't that listed?
Right.
Yes, I did include those other things, right? Because again, I can fondly remember when OpenAI had as its mission an educational teaching component.
Right, but that's not so much true anymore. Yeah.
An open source mission. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember when OpenAI had in-person events at their their building. I mean, it was hard to get in, but
right.
When they did the StarCraft 2 event. I don't know if you saw that.
I don't remember that now.
This is so the cool thing with StarCraft 2 is that I think it's you have 5 players play.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of there's this extra kind of team component to it. It was a small number, but it was a multi-agent system.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's just some things that in how Claude's markets, the history that it gives from the prompt.
Yeah.
is incomplete or is skewed, I specifically added things like Ida Momenejad's neuronav,
right.
It did start as I want to do Ryan Smith's course, but I don't want to do it in MATLAB.
Right.
that was I mean, if you want to speak to the biggest motivation on this, it's just
Let's not use MATLAB. That's the motivation.
I'm just not going to play. I'm not gonna try and make MATLAB work somehow with Octave.
Yeah.
But I also felt that like there was then the other thing being that I needed real tests for the code, right?
Yeah.
Like it wasn't, so again, Ryan Smith has some, when you are able to give Claude so many examples, as Ryan does have, even if it's in another language, this is something that it's quite good at, where it's just like, sure, I can take this and I can translate it into Haskell.
Yeah.
Like the Ralph Loop guy, when he visited the tower, he kept on saying like, so I took this thing that's working and I rewrote it in Erlang.
Yeah.
He's like, why did I choose Erlang? Because I thought it was funny. and yeah, so and recently Russ Poldrack, who's the chair of psychology now at Stanford, and his former postdoc Chris Gorolowski, just had the same conversation where they were meeting, talking about like, hey, we should just rewrite everything in MATLAB. was their version of the joke.
Yeah.
Instead of converting it. Yeah. But so he had those examples, but at the same time, Ida had this project where she was giving, she was trying to do Atari, but for animal behavior experiments.
Right.
And anyway, it just again speaks to this. Somebody described it, which I thought was interesting, which was how your interactions with Claude, or with large language models like this, is jagged.
Yeah.
And that you see, you see brilliance, and you see like almost a lack of common sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, like somehow together,
Yeah.
and that and how that potentially brings out a reaction in this. That it was interesting. I was I like reading Dave Weiner. This is Winer, the creator of RSS, or co-creator, as well as co-creator of podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
But he was talking about he was getting a human reaction of frustration in talking with these agents, and I think it was part of that was this jagged thing, where it's just like again you get this human reaction of this is how I would respond.
Yeah.
if the interaction was with another human, I would naturally respond with kind of like, I need to say something.
Right.
And yet, in this case, there is no better way of saying it than like, you're getting frustrated with this thing is not like voicing your frustration is not helpful.
Right.
Because the agent literally is what it is in terms of fixed weight. Like,
Actually, there's an interesting relationship between that and like a bureaucracy. It's like when you interact with a bureaucracy. It's kind of similar to that.
Yes, yes. But you mean like when you're dealing with the phone system, like on hold, or like in the well, it also just in terms of like you're gonna need to. I need to transfer you to this other department.
Yeah, or you have to fill out these forms, and it's like, well,
Yes,
I
yes.
don't, and then like that. Those are the rules, so I can't do anything about that.
Right. Yeah. I could yell at this low level person.
Right. Yeah.
But is there will it change my reality?
Right.
Anyway, I do think there's some insightful things though, as well in Claude's curriculum, and so like there's parts of it that historically it's again it's going off of very limited prompts, but it was quite good at filling in a lot of kind of missing material without prompting. But what I was the happiest about was actually some of the discussion that Claude does regarding the numerical differences in reinforcement learning and active inference, and as well as interestingly some numerical pitfalls or issues that might come up, numerical instabilities that that should be dealt with proactively, and yeah, so to some extent, I would say I gave Claude more detail and examples, obviously via code, right? And so I think that is kind of natural, but it was super appreciated, or like super, yeah. I mean, it's the kind of thing where it's some of these projects. I really wish I could get like kind of like domain experts to read and evaluate, right? So I don't know if it's worth going through. I mean, there's a data set that was released in neuroimaging, and just last year, and it's kind of special one because it's a neuroimaging data set, but it's one in which they scan the same subjects 7 times, or maybe 8 times, 7 or 8 times, and so that's pretty unique. That's very, very rare. Maybe if you're doing some sort of longitudinal thing. In this case, each of those scans was a new scan. It was like first we do MEG, then we put them in a 3 Tesla like super scanner with like really powerful gradients, and we get a very special diffusion scan. Then we put them, then we put them in another scanner where we get a traditional diffusion, plus we get all this quantitative relaxometry. That I could just keep going, right? Like it's just you get spectroscopy, you get TMS, you get resting fMRI, you get task after run. You get, yeah, just keeps it going. So it's incredibly unique data set to get this on same subjects. And anyway, I at this point, you'll see, I've got about 5 projects now that absolutely replace, like I've processed the data using kind of, what neuroimagers would consider the best tools to use to process each one of those, right? Which is basically me taking, and processing the data using the Oxford's, the FSL tools, right? And so, like one, I do, that's what I was taught, and absolutely no, but Claude's running, right? So Claude has done all that, and then Claude's absolutely replicated that analysis, but done it all in JAX, and done it, like one, using that as a test article, and then 2, because again, like I know how to, I know what to tell it, like now do this, right? Like now add this, and I'm enough of a domain expert that I can give it that guidance. But it is the kind of thing where it's like I've in a couple days I've replicated magnetic resonance spectroscopy, and interestingly, if you go to my I actually like the tool name of this one because it's Mrs. Jax. It's like MRS is magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So Mrs. Jax just happens to be. It's funny because there are tools. There's a tool set from Stanford that are kind of like MR tools, but the Stanford teams call them Mister. So they call it like, yeah. Anyway, so now I've got Mrs. Jax, and yeah, if you look at if you go to this page, or if you go to my GitHub for Mrs. Jax, you can see the history. It's again, I had a long history in spectroscopy. I was like biophysics as an undergrad. This is, like, I don't think I'm fooling myself, but it's just like, hey, this tool put together GABA editing, and, which is not something, I mean, again, this is a really unique data set because they include 7 Tesla data, where the higher field magnets give you more signal, and they can improve a lot of things, but they can also, people would sometimes say that they prefer structural imaging from a 3 Tesla because at 7 Tesla you have a harder time kind of controlling the field. But for spectroscopy, it's actually really useful. Anyway, it's again it's something where it's just like I feel like there is like this is I'd like confirmation from a real academic focused on this, but I feel like I've already done the validation work, and so I'll just end with Russ posted something yesterday on LinkedIn where it was just another scientist saying that as an experiment he'd ask Claude one prompt, and Claude had worked on something for 20 minutes and had put together a comparison of three models doing quantitative behavior analysis that was basically his master's. And at this point, I'm not quite sure how to move forward. Like I've this data set has given me kind of every modality. What I did for the past couple days was actually started working on focused ultrasound because there's a company in San Francisco called Open Water that actually specifically got its money to develop in an open source manner. So they received their first $50 million in funding, where with the caveat that they have to use open source license on their hardware and software. So they partner with Kitware for their software development. So if you use CMake, you know Kitware. And yeah, so it's like as a test, what I did was I extended their software to do something like super valuable, which is to handle heterogeneous skull. Like their model, they use a uniform homogeneous skull model for their low intensity focused ultrasound, which you can't do. Like, you can't do and then use it in humans. Yeah, I mean, I connected. I knew that there was a JAX implementation of some focused ultrasound software that was available from London. Connected that with University of Utah, where I know that they've got a multimodal head model that includes CT data. So I can do confirmation of using just MRI so that you don't need to have CT, and you can produce what's called a pseudo CT, and then actually used, because I was doing this at home at night, just while like watching a movie, I'm sending it on the cloud to an A100. Again, cloud's writing all these scripts, right? So it's actually putting together a package, moving it to modal, and running it on an A100 to confirm, various heating and other safety benchmarks that the focused ultrasound community has put together. And these are the kinds of things where it's just like, I'm just trying to think of things that like it might be hard to get a spectroscopist to read a paper by Claude, but Open Water has good reason, commercial interest in having a solution, and so yeah, like I'm going to see whether if I submit this to their open source team. They've got a head of open source software, and they're actually sponsoring our global NeuroHack next, April 10th as well. So yeah, this is just another way to see if this is actually a more real world test.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. That was great. Great discussion about that. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I'm actually writing a agent-assisted paper right now, and it's like you spend a lot of time going back and like doing additional sort of prompts and kind of cleaning up. And yeah, it's definitely, but it gives you a lot of like things you couldn't do otherwise. Like it enables a lot of like putting things into code and then kind of getting that fixed in some way. So it's like really I'm using it to put together this complex pipeline, and I don't think I could have done that on my own. So
yeah. I mean, and it's super interesting too, right? Where it's like Lame, right? So it's llama, but it ends a
yeah,
Lame. Like now think about how you can make an evolutionary model, evolutionary algorithm of this, where it's now able to be running things and creating, in a kind of Ken Stanley open-ended way. It can be putting together even new ones that you didn't even prompt.
right, yeah,
Right, and it can be like I really want to see what's going to happen at Gecko this year.
oh yeah.
Yeah. Because that's interesting. The how do you find I find that the searches are really interesting too, because when I search on something in Google, I mean I know that there is I know that there are ways to search, with additional terms and things like that. But it's interesting when you see a model search, like it will start, 10 or 15 prompts, 20 or 15 searches,
Yeah,
and be like sending out all sorts of variants of terms and things like that, and yeah, I mean, it's I found myself at home working on the focused ultrasounds, and I needed the University of Utah data set. Like Claude just kept on trying variants of University of Utah subnets, and it found the FTP sites
yeah,
just basically blindly.
yeah.
I think we should do something. I think we should do something, or I want to reach out to Russ and see what's beyond. I mean, Russ's question is like, how should we be teaching students,
Right.
to navigate this? I think there's a question of how should we be writing papers?
Right. Yeah.
Because I mean, it's what are we trying? Yeah, and which I mean, it's sort of related to what everybody in GSOC is seeing with increased proposals. How is this obviously going to change the like applying for a grant?
Right. Yeah.
funding models themselves.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Good questions to think about. Well, we'll be doing that, I think, probably next several meetings at least. But yeah, I'd like to actually spend more time thinking, maybe in the summer's open source meetings, about like how do we write a paper using, say, like an agent or agentic methods. I mean, maybe they're probably not. I mean, you can't just throw questions at it or prompts. You have to know kind of what you want in the first place, and then go kind of from there. So it's not a thing where you just cast a wide net to start with, and but yeah, it does take a long time. I think people think, no, you can pop out a paper in like 15 minutes. That's not.
Like again, like I mean, I've been basically banging on this for like almost 3 months, right? And like finally to the point where and I'm specifically doing very physicsy things.
Yeah.
Right? Where like there is an answer.
Yeah.
Like so I mean again like this is neuroimaging, but it's like diffusion neuroimaging, relaxometry, spectroscopy, magnetic and electrical fields. Like you can solve this in a sphere analytically before you start using complex geometries, and then you move to approximations and things like that. But like a lot of this is still, like I haven't done enough of the ALF stuff because I'm still working. I still want to have more better answers. Like I don't have the compute of the frontier teams that can be running experiments all the time.
Yeah.
But it is it's easy to produce a variety of results and variants in a way that you wouldn't have done if you were hand coding all this. Anyway, that's like.
All right. Yeah. So that's great. Well, why don't we wrap it up here? Thank you, Morgan, for that discussion, and thank you, Kavya, for the earlier discussion on neuroscience or computational neuroscience models and that competition. And thank you, Vidhi, for your points about the student group. All right. Thank you, and see you next week. Bye.
See you.
See you. Bye.